Got another exciting launch to talk about today. This time it's a Jack Mason watch, and I'm very kindly joined by Peter from Jack Mason.
Happy to be here again, Sam.
It's something a little bit different than the other Jack Masons that we've talked about. Talked about the Hydro Timer, the Dive Watch, the Strato Timer that you very kindly sent me in, and it's hardly left my wrist. Just an awesome GMT watch. This time it's something a little bit different. It's a dress watch, but it's an evolution of a watch that you previously had out. It's had a complete refreshed design and even a new movement. This is the new Ellum. Thank you for sending me one in, because all of the images that we'll be showing, all of the video clips, are of an actual production watch. So thank you for sending that in. I'd love to hear a bit of background.
The Ellum watch, unlike most of the watches you see out there, which are sport watches, the Ellum watch was a watch that we had launched in back in 2019 as a different option for someone who probably has primarily sport watches in their collection, but just wanted something, a quick grab and go, a watch that you can dress up or dress down, actually. And it was just a different option. So we launched that back in 2019 behind the inspiration of the 50s kind of time period, because I really enjoy the watches from that time due to its simplistic nature, just the sort of the serenity behind the design language of those watches back then really inspired myself and the team to create that watch back at that time. Fast forward to today, in the last couple of years, Jack Mason has gotten more than a facelift, if you will. We've really transitioned the brand into being a lot more enthusiast focused slash collectors focused with the Strato Timer. Threw our hat into the mix of the micro brand sort of pool with the Strato Timer and gained some popularity, fortunately. And so we felt that it was appropriate to follow up the Strato Timer and the Hydro Timer, for that matter, with a watch that's just something a little bit different, something you don't see in the microbrand space, which, you know, we're dress watches. And what better way to kind of show our transition as a brand than to do it in our Ellum watch, which we had previously launched before.
The previous version was a quartz version with a small seconds. This one's had quite the upgrade. We're now talking a manual wind Sellita SW210. This isn't just the standard one, is it? You've gone all out, extra finishing detail on the movement blue screws that I noticed as well.
That's kind of where we started. We knew it was no longer going to be a quartz. And so the conversation of automatic versus manual wind, that took some time and deliberation there. I even threw random polls up on different watch forums and things like that. What do you prefer, automatic, manual wind? For the record, the split between automatic and manual wind was actually quite 50-50. But the reason why we went with manual wind was because beyond the watch itself is something that I personally, my thought process behind every project is, how do we make this more than just a watch? Well, it's really the interaction that you have with the watch. We're forcing you to spend the 15 small seconds of just winding the watch and just forcing you to form that relationship with it, which is kind of how it was obviously back in the day. But to kind of bring that up and really start to appreciate the romance behind finer watchmaking, that's why we landed on the Sellita manual wind. And of course, when you're looking at the back of the watch, you obviously you want it to be very, very beautiful. And so we went with the top grade finishing there with the blue screws. And in addition to that, we are also regulating that as well to try to get it within plus minus 5 seconds. So it's highly accurate again.
I think this is the first time I've seen a manual wind Sellita movement. Quite impressed at how thin the watch is. It's a 9mm thickness, 38mm case, 45 from lug to lug. You can see it here on my 7.2-inch wrist. Yeah, I'm amazed at how thin you've got it, but it still feels substantial in a way. Not substantial massive, but it still has a presence to it.
When it comes to a watch, one of the things that I personally just that makes me uncomfortable is when a watch is put together in a way where it feels a little hollow. And so usually what that means is the dial is a little too far away from the underside of the crystal. The hands might be a little bit too short, or the worst case where the dial is too low and you see a double domed crystal. Sometimes when you single dome the crystal, it's actually to your benefit, because what it does is it hides that case wall thickness. But in this instance, got some heft because everything is as compact as possible between the case back sapphire crystal to the movement to the dial. Dial actually is domed at the ends as well. It comes down a little bit. It's very subtle. It's very subtle at the very end around the perimeter. And then the minute and second hand is also curved at the very tip. You have to look at it under a loop. It's curved, which matches the underside of the boxed crystal, which all of that is really just kind of layered on in a very thin sort of manner, which brings the entire thing, which is 9 millimeters thick. Even though it's 9 millimeters, it still feels like a full 9 millimeters. It just feels very just solid.
Let's delve into that a little bit more then. Curve the dial and the hands. Is that to compensate for the doming of the sapphire crystal so it looks flat?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. Aesthetically, when you look at the watches back in the 50s and 60s, you see kind of like that pie pan dial. You'll see the dial, which was domed even more. And when you actually look at our original Ellum, the dial was more noticeably domed. And that's because we use the small quartz movement. And when you have a small movement that basically takes up very little real estate underneath the dial, yeah, you're able to curve that dial down even more. However, with this movement, it actually filled up the dial quite a bit, but we were still able to just kind of dome it down a little. But what that does is it just reduces the overall thickness, because when you curve the hands down with it and then you curve the crystal down with it, you're really minimizing the negative space in the dial as much as possible.
The other thing striking about the watch is the linen effect dial.
The linen was the most important part of the watch for me. Obviously, the movement is as beautiful as it gets, but at the end of the day, it is a third party movement that we're sourcing. That part's out of my control. But what I can control is the dial. And so again, when I was looking back into the 50s and 60s time period and looking for inspiration behind the design of the watch. One watch in particular, the Omega Seamasters, the dress watches from the 60s, they had a linen dial. And the linen dial was a texture that you saw here and there during that time period across different watch brands, but they all had a different sort of take on it. Some were shallower in texture. Some were, they positioned the cross hatching to be more straight up and down as opposed to diamond shaped. But for me, the most important thing was I wanted the linen to feel as organic as possible. So the process actually took a really long time. And I think this is where a lot of enthusiasts might appreciate it. So it took us many, many rounds to get to the texture that it is right now. The first round, when I expressed the linen dial, the factory actually just scratched the dial one way and then scratched it another way. It gave the effect or the look of linen, but it certainly wasn't. It had no dimension on it. And so after a couple rounds, I wanted depth. And so what that meant was we needed to use a hydraulic stamping tool. And so to hydraulic stamp the dial under immense pressure, it's the only way to create various depths within the dial. And so not only that, but the pattern itself, I wanted to feel as organic as possible. So when you look at the dial under a loop or under a macro lens, the texture and pattern is completely randomized. You won't see the same type of pattern on different spots of the dial. So what we did was when we took the tool that's used to stamp the texture into the dial, and we literally machined different lines into it of different distances from each other and different thicknesses from each other. And so essentially it's like the machine's going back and forth this way and different depths. And then you turn it around and do it the other way. And so what the result is, it actually looks like a woven texture. It looks like when you follow a single line or almost like a thread, you actually see it kind of go up and down between the different lines. And so these are the details that you're not going to necessarily notice with just from a normal distance. But when you get under a loop, that's when you really start to appreciate kind of the craftsmanship that went behind just the texture alone.
You sent me the green and gold version. Is this a singular launch color, or is there other versions that will be released?
Yeah, so there's two. So you have the one which is that kind of what we're calling a sage green dial with the gold handset and indices. And then we have one that's gold PVD. The case is gold PVD with a kind of like a taupe or like a caramel colored dial on a black strap. And so the reason why I did that, because personally, I love to wear gold here and there. I think more men should wear gold. It can be a little flashy for some, but to be honest with you, that's how the men of the 50s and 60s, they wore that. And so I really wanted to create that colorway specifically so men or women, even for that matter. Side note, that's a whole other category and market that I'm really trying to get into with the Ellum, because I feel like it's extremely underrepresented in the microbrand space when it comes to women's watches. And so those are the two colorways. Personally, I'm pushing for the gold to make it onto more to more on make it onto more wrists.
You made a good point as well. We've been, or I think I started this off referring it to as a dress watch. The watch that this is, I guess, a homage of those vintage. That's just what watches were like at the time, weren't they? That Omega was at their first ever Seamaster. It was a multifunctional watch, and I think this is as well. It has an everyday watch as well, but then you obviously you can dress it up as well. And I noticed as well that you've not just slapped any old leather band on here. There's a lot of thought that's gone into the leather that's used as well, and you're using a type of leather that I've not heard of before. So how did that come about?
We certainly don't want to just have the head of a watch. We want the entire wearing experience to be very comfortable. Thought it was important to use a very fine Italian leather. This one in particular, it's a full grain calfskin leather that's called an Epsom leather. And the Epsom leather is a leather that you typically see in high-end fashion brands like Hermes and Dior and things like that. They use them on their handbags or other types of leather goods. That little pebble texture really kind of gives it a refined look and feel. And most importantly, right out of the box, you're not going to have that stiff sort of leather feel. This thing, as soon as you take it out of the box and put it on, it feels like it's already been worn, which is kind of the beauty of more higher quality leather.
Well, let's get down to what people are probably most interested in. What's the launch price on these?
Yeah, so these will launch on February 23rd on our website, jackmasonbrand.com. And they will retail at $949 as the sort of introductory price. We only made a limited amount this first go around at 300 units. There's only 150 of each colorway since we're launching the two. I have a pretty good feeling these will do quite well, and I already have several other color iterations planned for later this year. So don't be surprised if you see a salmon color dial and other things like that.
Thank you for sending me this pre-production one. This is now going off to another reviewer to get their hands on. Guys, let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Head over to Jack Mason if you want to find out more details about this. I'll leave a link in the description. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks again. Can't wait to be back again.
Thanks for watching, and see you next time on Casual Watch Reviews.